Welcome to Playing Above the Line, where we interview entrepreneurs, business owners, and community activists to get their thoughts and perspectives on leadership. Playing Above the Line is sponsored by Aviso Group, a business consulting and accounting firm focused on preparing clients for the future through innovation and positive growth. Welcome to Playing Above the Line. I'm Alan, your host, and we are coming to you today from Hatch in downtown Fairhope. Rick Miller does a great job here, so if you want to learn more about Hatch and what they do, you can check them out at hatchfairhope.com. Our guest today is Monica Anderson-Young, and she is the principal and owner of Assisted Communications, and we look forward to hearing what Monica has to say about that. But I've got a little teaser for you. We're going to talk about something called, or somebody, I'm not even sure, Short the Squirrel at some point later on in the episode. So please stay tuned because I'm interested to find out what Short is about, and you will be too. So Monica, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so first basic question, what is Assisted Communications, and what do you do there?
I'm the owner, like you mentioned, but I help companies and businesses flourish. And I do that through building culture, creating engagement, wrapping it all up in communications, and do that so that they have better efficiency, which affects that bottom line, making sure it's a revenue generating reason to communicate clearly.
Okay.
Mostly do internal communications, although I've got a background in both internal and external.
Okay, so what led you to start Assisted Communications? Was that something you've always kind of wanted to be your own boss, or is it something that just kind of found you? How'd that come about?
It's kind of a meandering career path, if you will.
Yeah.
I grew up here, went to Fairhope High School, went to Troy on a full academic scholarship, which was a wonderful blessing to our family. Met my husband there. We got married and moved to Florida, where I was a teacher. So I was a sixth grade teacher in Florida. His job took us all over. From Florida, we came to Monroeville, Alabama. He was with VF. Then we lived in Paris, France for a little bit.
Wow.
Ended up in North Carolina, and he was with Polo Ralph Lauren, and I had become a stay-at-home mom. And so by the time our girls, we have 3, they're wonderful. They're just wonderful. They were ready to start school. My husband was in Asia a lot, and so I thought, I can't go be a teacher again. High school starts at 7. Elementary starts at 9, and here I am with no help because we're in North Carolina. So I turned to writing, and I began writing for different newspapers, magazines, and so forth. It was a career that took off on its own, and then I started advising companies in terms of their communication process and making sure that they had really strong PR plans. In about, I guess it was 2012, a friend from church actually had been named CIO of an insurance company for North and South America. Needed a little help with some internal comms. I went and helped him. It was supposed to be 90 days. It was supposed to be 15 hours a week. It turned into a full-time gig of like 15 hours a day. And I traveled all over North and South America, and we developed an internal comms strategic engagement practice through that, which is what I had been doing for small businesses. So that was the first time on a global scale. And it just evolved into more positions within that company. I became the global innovation catalyst for the company as one of the largest insurance companies in the world. And I got to go all over the globe doing that. Founded some really interesting joint ventures with other colleagues, such as Global Women in Technology. And so that turned into multiple chapters again all over the world, and I got to go help get those started and develop those in a virtual chapter, and it's just been a great process. And during that time, I met the person that I work closely with now. This is the 3rd company we've worked together in, and I support her. She's a CIO, and it's just more of the same. So just helping people do their jobs well and in a manner that they like, and helping find joy on the job, and translating that into, again, a revenue booster because it's efficient.
So many questions. I'm intrigued because your formal education is in elementary education, I guess. Or
it was English. I was
English. Okay.
English major in secondary ed, and then my master's is in global strategic communication.
Okay, so that was was going to be my question: is how do you go from there to having the knowledge and skill set to be able to advise these companies on culture and communication and that kind of thing, but you did have some formal training in
Yes,
that.
I did. So, again, after that kind of all started coming together, I realized, I need some more heft to what I feel like isn't intuitively. So I did get my master's in global strategic communication from Georgetown, and then I've got a post-grad certificate in organizational behavior from Harvard, and then I am getting my PhD from Troy, back where I started. It gives me chills to say that, in global leadership right now.
Very cool. But I've got to think that even though you do have that formal education, is there kind of an innate, I don't know if you want to call it ability or skill set that you think that you had to be able to excel in this area? I mean, is it something, I guess my question is it something are you born with it, or can anyone kind of develop your skill set, or do you think it's a combination of both?
I think we're all blessed with different skill sets, and I think we're just all blessed with different talents. I'm a big believer in Strengths Finder, if you're familiar with that. As for me, I love people, I love learning, and I really love to see people enjoy what they do and find a spark to it.
That's very cool, very cool. All right, well, let's kind of turn and talk a little bit about leadership. Ask you to define some qualities or characteristics of a good leader. So when I say that, leadership, what do you think about? I mean, what's your definition? What comes to mind?
That's funny you ask that, because in our first term of study, which was just a few months ago, we defined global leadership. And what we found was there are so many different definitions to that. But I think the commonalities are that a good leader is going to care about other people. They're going to care about the role they have, and they're going to care about it being done well. I think at the end of the day, the best employees are people who are corporate stewards. So you're being compensated for your time. And if you use your time wisely and you use your time well, you're being a good corporate steward, and you're giving what you've been asked to give. And so a leader needs to be somebody who motivates someone to be a strong corporate steward.
You know, we've done a lot of these episodes, and I don't think anyone has really ever said that in those terms, which I think is very insightful, because I think you're absolutely correct. How are we to lead others when we can't be good stewards of what we've been given ourselves? And that's I'm talking about our own talents and obviously monetary things and that kind of thing. That's a great insight. I appreciate that.
Well, would you say this was the 99th episode? So I'm so glad to bring that nugget on the 99th
No, I mean,
episode.
seriously. And we're going to get to a couple more things that I think are great on your show primer that you wrote. Just kind of interesting, maybe along the same vein of what we've talked about previously, but maybe not put in quite the same way. So I'm looking forward to kind of touching on those. So, have you always considered yourself to be a leader or a good leader? Has your leadership philosophy changed over the years? I mean, look back when you were a undergraduate student, and getting your undergraduate degree in English to now. I mean, how has your view changed on leadership, or has it?
I'm grateful to say I've definitely matured. Yeah. Probably my family and other people are grateful to say that too. I'm so glad there wasn't social media when I was a teenager. That probably would have really affected my leadership capabilities as an adult. Just kidding. My curfew was too early to really do much. But yeah, I would say girls at that time that I was growing up, and that would be like mid-'80s, you weren't a leader, you were bossy. And it's really only within the last decade or 15 years that women have truly been able to be celebrated for the way they lead. And that can be in many different ways. I'm so fortunate. I am married to a man that supports where my gifts are. And they're in different places than his are. And he's certainly a leader. But we are in good lockstep in supporting each other's different talents. And I think that's important too, that you surround yourself with a network that appreciates what your gifts are. If you made me come to Aviso and balance somebody's spreadsheet, even pressing the right buttons, you'd have the wrong person.
Right.
But if you have me come and do a cultural audit and you say, why isn't this person who can do those spreadsheets, why aren't they able to do that? I can get to the root of that, and I can help find out what makes that person tick, where they want to get back to their gift and they want to give it. So that's where I would say that my leadership capabilities are.
Yeah. Well, that's good. And so speaking of culture, we're big believers at Aviso Group that culture is very important, number one. Number two, every organization has a culture, and if you don't think you do, then that's a problem. So what's important about culture, and why do we've always talked about culture as far as employee engagement and that kind of thing, but you take it a step further and say that the right culture then will ultimately drive profitability and efficiency and increase the bottom line. So what is it about culture that's so important and so dynamic that it can have that kind of effect?
Well, I use the analogy that, culture is that engine that drives an organization, and your communication's the gas, it's the oil, it keeps it going. I think culture from a diversity and inclusion standpoint is super important. And by that, I don't mean that, we all have to have, a different skin tone. That matters. That matters so much. And that matters because how you pull everyone together, people have different perspectives in how they were grown, but it's more than that. It's different belief systems, it's different backgrounds, it's different ways of looking at things. And when you build a culture that is respectful of that and inclusive of people's different opinions, not to disagree, which seems to be our attitude du jour of our nation. Yeah, right. But when you bring people together and say, now tell me why you see it that way, and this is how I see it, but how can we shape it and make it stronger? It just becomes just this adhesive that it affects your revenue.
Yeah. Well, and so obviously you think, and I do as well, that culture is very important. Do you subscribe to the theory that culture can be destroyed much quicker than it can be built or it is built?
Yes, and I would say that centers around trust. Yeah. And trust is a very important component of culture. If you have a team that, you just don't trust that there's going to be a quote-unquote another meeting after the meeting where two people who don't agree with what came out of what happened in the boardroom, so they're going to pull aside and they're going to talk about, well, can you believe that? That creates division in a company or in a team or an organization, and that's built on trust. Yeah. And again, that's one of the major components of culture. And so when I do cultural audits for organizations, or I go in and kind of see the landscape, trust is one of the first places I start. If you're not familiar with Edelman's Barometer of Trust, where every year they monitor and rank organizations and companies, it's one of the most fascinating things I think that we have as practitioners in this space to reference, is the way, if you look at the Edelman Barometer of Trust and how it changes each year in terms of thematically and the different companies it measures. It's wonderful.
So who would be a company at the top of the list that we'd be familiar with, or close to the top, that has a great culture? I think I've got one in mind that I'm kind of thinking about, but I'm just interested.
Who are you thinking about?
And I'm thinking like Chick-fil-A, right? I mean, yes. They just seem to be, and I think that part of that is because I don't really know anything about the inner workings of their organization, but I mean, I do know that when I go to the drive-through and there are cars a half mile down the road, that it takes me probably 5 minutes to get my order in, get my food, and be gone. They're efficient. They've got their processes down, and I've got to think that that's got something to do with culture, which then depends on trust and that kind of thing among the employees.
So let me ask you, what you're seeing, is it process or is it culture?
Well, I think the most obvious thing that we see when we do that is the process, but I do think that the culture drives the ability for them to have those processes in place. That's my take, but I could be. You're the experts. You tell me.
I love Chick-fil-A. I love it. I like to just drive through there so somebody tells me to have a blessed day. Yeah, I love that. If you're ever feeling down, you should totally drive through a Chick-fil-A because you will feel better as soon as you leave. Yeah, and you're right. That is part of their culture. So what you've experienced as a client or a customer of Chick-fil-A is you've experienced efficient process.
Right, yeah.
Which is the result of the culture. Okay. So yes, you answered that as I would have hoped.
Yeah, for me. Well, that's very good because I consider myself a good student, so I'm glad I got an A on that little exam. So I appreciate that. But I do have one more question as it pertains to culture. The old idiom, one bad apple can spoil the barrel or whatever. One person could ruin the culture of an organization. Correct or not? Or is that too much of an overstep, maybe, do you think?
So I think that is true, but I wouldn't say they could ruin a culture. I just think they could disrupt a culture, which disrupts efficiency, which disrupts revenue. Right. So it's all connected. For a leader to have somebody in his or her organization that's struggling and maybe contributing to that, the leader really has to turn around and look reflectively at him or herself and think, oh gosh, what can I do to bring this person back into the fold, to create that trust?
Well, and that dovetails, and I need to go circle back to a couple of things, but I think what you just said kind of plays into something that you put on your show primer. So we asked the question, is there a specific aspect of leadership that you want to focus on? And I'm just going to read this verbatim because I think it's great. All right, you said, my role is one of leadership, support, and development. It's an interesting place to be because I have to be bold enough to give insight while encouraging enough to build up.
So true.
It's a fine line, right? And I think that goes to what you just were talking about, because you've got to be able to, when you recognize that quote, bad apple that may not necessarily destroy your culture, but you've got to address it some way. I mean, they've either got to go or you've got to somehow get them to change their behavior, whatever the issue is that's contributing to the culture issue, right? And so I think that comes back to being bold enough to give insight while being encouraging enough to build up, because you don't always want to beat you over your head and wear you down. You've got to build folks up as well. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think it's interesting that you focused on that, because I would say, well, you might ask me, well, Monica, where did you learn that? And I would tell you, not in any classroom, not in any boardroom. I learned that in my home as a parent. And a lot of times moms feel like, oh, what do I have to bring back to the workplace? I've been at home and I've lost my skills, or I've lost touch with things. And I do want to emphasize this. I've been really, really lucky. I've gotten to do it all. Everything I've wanted to do in a career, I've gotten to do. Everything I've wanted to do as a mother, I got to do as a mother. I got to be a stay-at-home mom. I got to be a work-from-home career mother. I have worked from home since, oh gosh, I can't even do the math. I told you that earlier, since 2003. Mm-hmm. And so this remote situation of working from home, it wasn't new to me. This is how I've built my entire career, because I've been fortunate enough to do that. And so what you just read about being bold enough to say, hey, that might not be right, but encouraging enough to build up, that's the tenet of being a good parent. And so I was able to translate that, which I did not always do well. I have 3 daughters who could stand here and tell you every time I got it wrong, which is, why every parent should have 3 savings accounts for their children, right? At least their daughters. 1 is for the wedding if they want that. 2 is for an education if they want that. And 3 is for the therapist for everything we've gotten wrong as parents. But yeah, I learned that as a mom, and I've taken that right to the workplace. And whether it's supporting the CIO I support and saying something that might be hard for her to hear, but is necessary for her as a leader, as well as saying, oh my gosh, you are just doing such a great job with this project. Look what the feedback has been, because feedback's everything.
That was worth the price of admission right there. So if you folks haven't picked up anything that Monica's laid down so far, I hope that hit the rewind button, go back about 2 or 3 minutes and listen to that section. That was excellent. Thank you for that. Let's talk about listening, because it came up a couple episodes ago with Rhett Ross. He was here, and he, one of the things that he said he needed to work on was his listening skills and that kind of thing. And I thought what you said was also very good. You want to improve on always listening to absorb rather than listening to respond. Well,
I will tell you this. I'm a much better listener at work than I am at home. I just like to say that to all my family members who are listening. But yes, I mean, that's a common communication misstep. It's even a quote, So many people just listen to answer, and you can see it in their eyes. Like, you can see them typing in their head what's about to come out of their mouth while you're talking, because all they want to do is reply. They don't want to absorb. And I don't know if you've watched The Social Dilemma yet on Netflix. Complete game changer about how you view what's happening on our screens. But I think that's what's kind of happened to us as a society. We've stopped listening to understand. We don't even listen. We just respond. And when that happens to seep into your workplace, it's such a dangerous thing. And I don't mean politically, but I just mean that concept of not listening to absorb, and which takes me back to building that culture. Because another piece of the foundation, trust, is this listening so you understand somebody else.
Yeah, no doubt. That is great stuff. One more question before we kind of change directions a little bit, but you mentioned 3 organizations or 3 community-supported activities that had a particular influence on your path to where you are today when you were in high school. Can you expand on what those are a little bit?
Yes, it's funny because they've kind of led to, they were like career builders. I can't think of a bigger influence than my parents. Brenda and John Anderson, they are just the bedrock. But in high school, I had the opportunity to participate in some different activities, as you know, young people can do. But I was a cheerleader for Sue Ellen Brazil, and man, was she tough. Woo, she was tough. And at the time, I might have chafed a little bit at the toughness, but as an adult, I'm like so grateful I heard that woman say, do it again, at least 4 million times while I was at Fairhope High School. Do it again, do it again. And what I learned from that is, you know what? You do it right, you don't have to do it again. And that has that has carried me. The second organization I would say would be, well, actually, I'll talk about two, but getting to participate in Dogwood and then representing Baldwin County in what is now Distinguished Young Women. Mm-hmm. They gave me, a young woman, opportunities to interact and build leadership skills that I didn't recognize at the time. That's what they were doing for me. And I cannot thank the community volunteers enough for what they invest in young women in those programs. It takes a lot of hours. It takes way more than I ever recognized when I was young and participating. But by giving of themselves, they really invest in their communities. And so that was huge. And then the third thing was Mrs. Macklin, who taught math at Fairhope, got Fairhope the very first computer lab.
Okay.
And nobody else had it in our county. And she got the lab at Fairhope High School with the deal that elementary students and middle students at Fairhope Elementary and Fairhope Middle School could come up to the high school 1 hour each week. They would take turns, and they would come to the computer lab. And so she recruited 2 guys who were more technically oriented, and then she recruited me, and I was not technically oriented, which is so funny because I work in IT today, and I swear I have the same job I did when I was a senior in high school. And I would greet the kids and bring them in and say, don't be afraid of this is going to be so great, you're going to do a good job at it, we're so glad you're here. And that was my job in the computer lab.
That's great.
And it was so smart of her to have that insight that the lab needed that position, because we were on the cusp of what would become the digital age. These would become the parents of the digital natives who are our Gen Zers now. And by making that such a welcoming, warm experience in Fairhope, Alabama, there is a whole little generation walking around here who had a great first experience because of Mrs. Macklin's insight of how to market technology, not just deliver it.
That's great. That's good stuff. Okay, now I'm about to ask this question. I don't know what I'm getting myself into, but I've got to ask. So who is Short the Squirrel, and why does he have a Facebook page?
So I'm so glad you've asked that.
I gotta find out what this is about.
So this is the whole reason I wanted to come, was to talk about Short the Squirrel. So this is my passion project. And when I say passion project, I cannot tell you how much Short the Squirrel just dominates so many of my thoughts. Short the Squirrel is a little guy who encourages literacy in Alabama. So my oldest daughter is an assistant DA in Mobile.
Okay.
We used to call her the baby DA last summer because she had just graduated law school. She got her first job. She was so excited. She loves it so much. And she would come home, because it was before she got married, and she would come home and say, oh my goodness, Mom, you will not believe what's happening in the courtroom. The stories are either tragic or just incredibly, you can't believe it, so you have to laugh at some of them. A lot of tragedy. But she would tell me about the kids that would come in with nothing to do because there are no electronics in the courtroom. And so they would just, flounder and flap around. And I would say, well, why don't y'all give them an activity sheet? She said, you mean like at church? And I said, exactly. Crayons and activity sheet, or like at church or at like the local restaurant. She's like, Mom, this is the government. We don't have money to do that. We can't do that. And I said, I think we could do that. I think we could do that. And so she and I started working on something for that. And we quickly realized that, 1, she didn't have time to do it. And 2, she really shouldn't be doing that. It needed to be an outside project by somebody else. And so my college sorority friend, and I co-founded Short the Squirrel. So Dr. D. Dupree Bennett and I worked on this character. We've brought him to life. It's an activity book. It's a 16-page activity book. We piloted it in Baldwin, Mobile, Pike, and Escambia counties this summer to see what the interest in the level was. It brings literacy to children ages 4 to 9 who might be in the courtroom for any reason. They could be part of a foster care hearing. They could be testifying because they witnessed something. They could be accompanying a parent because the parent got a speeding ticket. My 3 girls had that experience. They could be in the courtroom for just multiple reasons, but they get this packet, which is a bag with an activity book that tells them what they're seeing. It tells them the procedure of the court. It introduces the concept of what's happening in that scene that they are experiencing from a child's point of view and a child's literacy level. It has all sorts of activities in it that increases literacy, and it's completely free. And we are seeking funding to get it into the entire state of Alabama in the first quarter of January 2021. We filed our 501(c)(3). We have met with attorneys who are donating their time and service to us. We have a team of 20 volunteers now.
Oh, wow.
We've got student workers at Troy who are just really doing tremendous things. We've applied to be part of the Troy Idea Bank. Hopefully, by the time this airs, we'll know that that was a yes. So it's so much fun, and it brings me, again, I would say it brings me satisfaction, but it doesn't, because every day there's a new fact that makes me think I've got to work harder. Yesterday we found out how many kids were in domestic and abuse cases in the state of Alabama, and the number was overwhelming. It was in the tens of thousands, and we were like, we just wanted to put 100 books in each county, and we realized that's not enough. It's not enough, so we're working even harder.
That is one of the coolest things I've heard in a long, long time, Producer Carrie. I mean, that is awesome. I will tell you this. That is a noble cause, and I wish you nothing but success. So Short the Squirrel does, like I said, have a Facebook page, and you can also go to shortthesquirrel.com, and short is S-H-O-R-T, just like you think it would be, shortthesquirrel.com, to support Monica in what she's doing. That is absolutely outstanding. All right, well, one thing that I typically ask our guests is their vision for their particular organization or whatever, but I want to focus, although I know what you do, assisted communications is great and wonderful. I want to ask you about Short the Squirrel, because I just can't get over how cool that is. So when you look down the road, 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, what's your vision for Short the Squirrel? I mean, what do you want this to develop into?
Well, the more we do it, the more we see needs for it. So I'll just give you a rough timeline. Short will be a year old in February. We are going to have a giant birthday party, which is going to be like a reading pep rally in Montgomery. We're going to live stream it to the entire state so any classroom can see what Short is celebrating. We've identified some other gaps of time where kids could use Short, and that would be in the healthcare situation. Mm-hmm. So waiting rooms, just wherever that we can put Short Gets Sick. That's our second book. But we've got a sequel for Short in Court. It's called Short Learns the Law. And we're going to focus on some of the, why we follow the law. So we're using Short as both civics education as well as reading education. So literacy and civics and our community. Short's going to go to the fire station. Short's going to meet the mayor. Short's going to go to the grocery store and learn about nutrition and healthy living. So all those things that our kids really get along the way in curriculum, we're going to have books where they actually see it. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but Governor Ivey passed the Alabama Literacy Act this past summer. Unknown to us while we were building this program, but boy, are we capitalizing on the coincidence.
Yeah, that's great.
We've just had so much support that it's not coincidence. There's just so many things that have happened to us to make sure it becomes successful. We know that there's a bigger purpose behind this, and we are just diving into it.
No doubt, that's great. I really can't think of a better way to wrap this up. You are inspiring. Your passion for what you do is palpable, and I, for one, appreciate the time that you have spent to come and talk to us. If folks want to check you out, we'll have your social media and things like that linked in the show notes, but they can go to assistedcommunications.com to learn more about you professionally, and again, shortthesquirrel.com to learn about Short.
Yes.
Monica, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and if you did, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes and Spotify. It definitely helps us in the ratings, and it also makes it easier for other folks to find the podcast. And as always, a big thank you to producer and editor Carrie Wolf. Playing Above the Line is sponsored by Avizo Group. If you want to know more about who we are and what we do, you can visit our website at avizogroup.com. That's AVIZO group.com. You can also check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thanks for listening.